morning. Please be seated. We have Mr. Lee come forward, please. Can you state your name for the record, please?
Brian McLean Lee.
I understand you'll take the oath.
Yes, Commissioner. I, Brian McLean Lee, swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to this Commission shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Please be seated. Mr. Gandhi.
May it please the Commission appear for Mr. Lee. Hi, Mr. Lee. You prepared a statement dated 16th of September in response to a summons dated 2nd of September.
I did.
Do you see a copy of your statement on the screen?
I do.
Is the first page of your statement CRW 998002559?
It is.
Right. Can we please scroll down to the penultimate page? The reference is ending 0585. Ms. Lee, is that a schedule to your statement?
It is.
And it lists a number of documents?
It does.
I understand you wish to make one amendment to paragraph 198 of your statement.
Yes, I do.
The page reference is ending 578. Paragraph 198.
Yes.
What's the amendment that you wish to make?
So on the last line of 198, the addition of not are not of interest to law enforcement instead of are of interest to the.
Subject to that one amendment, is your statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, it is.
Commissioner, I tender that statement.
Thank you, Mr. Gandhi. That document with the number as referenced is admitted as an exhibit. Thank you, Ms. Nelson.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Lee, just looking at your statement now at page 1. Thank you.
Yes.
You were originally employed by Crown in 2006
That's correct.
and you currently report directly to Mr. Lonnie Bossy, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you've done so since January 2020 when you took on your current role.
That's correct.
And prior to that you reported to Mr. Joshua Preston, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you meet with Mr. Preston regularly when you reported to him?
Yes, I did.
How often did you meet with him?
It was weekly. If we couldn't meet weekly for the purposes of particularly when he was interstate, we would have email or phone conversations. So it was generally weekly.
And do you meet with Mr. Bossy weekly currently?
Currently, it is scheduled for every week, but not necessarily the ability for us to catch up weekly. But again, similar to with Mr. Preston, should I need to discuss anything with him, I can call or email him.
And you worked at Crown in security-related roles since 2014, is that correct?
That's correct.
And from July 2015, you're promoted to a general manager position that also included management of the surveillance function at Crown, Perth.
That's correct.
What previous experience did you have with a surveillance capability?
In a casino or outside of casino,
At all?
no experience in that space.
Was the general manager of surveillance and security a position that existed prior to the appointment of you to that role?
It did, yes.
How long had it existed as a position?
It had existed, I believe, for around a 12-month period. The gentleman that held that position left the business. The role was split, security and surveillance separate, and then came back together with myself moving into that capacity as general manager of both departments.
So the appointment, the person who held the position prior to you for a year,
Yes,
that was a dual role as general manager of surveillance and security, is that correct?
that's correct.
but prior to that, the roles had been split. So there was a general manager of surveillance, there was a separate position to general manager of security.
That's correct.
So at the time you took the position, the management of both functions had only been merged for 1 year.
Yes.
Are you aware that the surveillance operation is directly mentioned in the casino directions and also the casino manual of operations?
I do.
And are you aware of what the casino directions say in relation to the independent nature of the surveillance function at the casino?
Yes, I am.
What does it say?
Oh, if I paraphrase, it's to be surveillance operation to be independent from name some other business units. I think gaming is particularly named.
I'll show you the document, GWC.0001 0006 0001 at page 11. And it's 7.8. At the bottom of the page, the casino operator shall ensure that all persons assigned to monitor or surveillance activities are independent of the casino gaming, security and cashier's cage departments. You've seen that before.
Yes, I've seen that before.
And that was the position when you took on the role of the two merged roles of surveillance and security, general management, wasn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
So in your view, is the existence of your position in contradiction to those casino directions at 7.8?
I object. It's a question that calls for a legal determination of the proper meaning of 7.8. It's not a matter for this witness.
I'll ask you to rephrase the
Commissioner,
question.
I withdraw the question. I'll move on
Thank
and
you.
ask some more questions around that. Under your leadership, has there been a integration of the surveillance operation function with security operations?
The only, apart from my role, the only other position that has a view across both departments is that of the investigations and compliance manager.
And that's Mr. Burling.
That's correct.
Could I take you back to your statement, CRW 998 002 0559, to page 6, and particularly paragraph 38. In that paragraph, you mentioned that there are members of both teams who work collaboratively across both departments, don't you?
Yes.
So what percentage of the surveillance team also work collaboratively with security?
The use of the term collaborative relates to, so from an investigative perspective, there are investigators and security and investigators in surveillance, overseen by Mr. Burling. Collaborative is particularly in the matter of investigations that may require surveillance to interrogate footage and security to obtain statements and any other pieces of evidence. And typically that's for the purposes of supporting a police investigation. So the collaboration is, it might be that the security investigator needs surveillance to assist with trying to see whether there's available footage. They will email and ask, this is a police inquiry, can you please assist with available footage? And that's where that collaboration is. Also, from an operational perspective, the surveillance team overview security operations. So if there is a particular task that security needs to be involved with, let's say, for instance, the removal of a patron, they must contact surveillance. Surveillance will advise them that they've got coverage, and then they can commence the conversation and the removal. So the collaboration is more in that respect.
So in your view, the collaboration is limited to those two distinct jobs. One, firstly, the getting together police briefs or evidence to give to police, and secondly, liaising to remove someone from the premises if necessary.
That's correct.
Do security staff have free access to surveillance material?
No.
And if they are given access to surveillance material, is it documented in an email or some other form?
Sorry, can I clarify material? What context that is that? Because we have incident reports, or there's actually the footage itself.
And as I understand it, those incident reports and the footage are on the iTrack system, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So do any security staff have access to iTrack without having to go and request it from surveillance?
Yes. Yes.
How many security staff?
There would be, apart from myself, there was about roughly 3 to 4 positions of senior management that look at the footage. So they have no control over the cameras. So when they go into the iTrack incident and they're reviewing, it could be a customer complaint, it could be a daily or weekly review that we do of physical interactions with patrons, or another type of investigation, the footage that has been secured by surveillance to the incident, those security managers have access to review that footage for the purposes of that work.
And apart from the footage, they have access to review the incident report that dovetails with that particular bit of footage.
That's correct. The surveillance predominantly create the incident because their security could be dealing with the incident at the time. So surveillance will commence, in most cases, the creation of an incident, and security will provide additions to that material. What security don't have accessibility to, because you can control this in iTrack, is gaming-related specific items, such as if there are advantage players, card counts, cheats, sort of the gaming protection side of the business.
Okay. So can security staff go in and amend a iTrack notification report that's been done by the surveillance operative?
They can go into the incident in certain levels. I don't believe security officers, but our managers can provide additions to the iTrack incident. I'm unsure whether I don't believe they can delete information. But if you do provide an addition to the iTrack incident, there is a recorded time, date, stamp, and the employee's number who has gone into the incident.
So changes to iTrack notifications are audited then?
Yes.
We'll go to paragraph 22 of your statement, thank you, which is at page 3. And you're talking there about your overall responsibility in your position, and you say it's for the safety, security and protection of Crown's resort and its assets, which include its staff and customers. So by safety, security and protection, are you referring to maintaining the physical safety of people on site and the physical safety of Crown's assets?
Yes.
You could look at the casino manual, thank you, in relation to the breadth of the surveillance role as it's stated there, and that's document GWC 0001 0013 0043, section 17. We could go to page 3, thank you. it's page, top of page 2, going to page 3. Right, thank you. So, this is the list that we have. Yeah, we'll move on from there because I can't find the actual reference. Is the surveillance department responsible for providing surveillance of all the casino and entertainment complex over a 24-hour period?
Yes, it is.
So it's the eyes and ears of the entire complex for 24 hours, 7 days a week?
Yes.
And are shifts rostered on in the surveillance area to man those cameras, or the consoles, sorry, for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
Yes, they are.
At paragraph 32 of your statement, you say the surveillance team has 4 shifts of 8 operators,
Yes, that's correct.
and you say that's appropriate to oversee the casino, paragraph 32, which is on the screen now.
Yes.
So do I understand your view is that the surveillance team is appropriately resourced at the moment for doing the job it needs to do?
Yes.
What technology does surveillance have to fulfil this obligation in a broad sense?
So there's camera numbers, obviously. So they cover the property. We have recently implemented facial recognition technology. We have access control on most doors around the property, particularly those two areas such as cage and count facilities, but the alarms are monitored. Each table and around each of the bars there are duress alarm facilities that are reported back to surveillance. We have a fire monitoring system that reports back to surveillance. So yeah, that's the sort of general technology that at this stage is assisting the team.
And how long has the facial recognition technology been in place?
Since February 2020, from my recollection.
Thank you. We could go back to the casino manual, GWC 0001 0013 0043, and it's page 6, thank you. And I wanted to take you to 1.1, which is the role of the surveillance department. Just give you a minute to refamiliarise yourself with those particular dash points. You've read those,
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes, I have.
Would you agree that the manual contemplates that the maintenance of gaming integrity is a separate activity of the surveillance department to monitoring and recording gaming activities and transactions?
Sorry, could you please repeat that question?
You see at the second last dash point, maintaining gaming integrity,
Yes.
and that is listed as a separate role to monitoring gaming activities and transactions, which is 2 dash points above that, isn't it?
That's correct, yes. I see those forming the one. They tie in together when we're looking at gaming in its general sense, the protection of gaming integrity, inclusive observing activities and transactions.
I was wanting to ask you how you saw your general statement of your role, which we went to at paragraph 22 about being concerned with safety, security and protection, how that relates to those specific roles of the surveillance department that the casino manual requires.
Now, I know my role includes more broader in the term of protection, if you put it in that respect. Protection is protection of its integrity, protection of activity on the tables to ensure that there's no stealing, fraud or other types of adverse behaviours taking place. So the term of protection is more broader than physical security presence.
So you see protection as including maintaining gaming integrity?
Yes.
Because what I wanted to suggest to you was that your statement in paragraph 22, it has more of a security-focused outlook.
It seems that way, but that's not how I operate and how I view my role and responsibilities.
So you don't prioritise security over surveillance in performing your role?
No.
So how does surveillance actively maintain gaming integrity?
We have operators that are consistently tasked with monitoring gaming activity that is live, and that's observing the activity of the dealers to ensure that they're dealing in accordance with the rules in the manual, and also to observe patron behaviour at tables, but also more broadly in the machine space as well.
And what does the surveillance area do if it does detect suspected illegal activity?
So they will advise the surveillance, usually it's the surveillance operator that would identify any concern. They will discuss it with the surveillance shift manager. Depending on what the activity is, they will, if it's relating to possibility that a patron is trying to pass post, so place a bet on a bet that's won after it's been closed, or believe that has transpired, they will contact the relevant manager of the table games department to have them assist in reviewing the footage to basically see that, yes, we concur that there's been a breach of a particular rule, and then security would be involved at some point to also review that footage. And if required, if it can be seen that there was a pass post or other illegal activity, then security will take the responsibility in excluding the patron involved.
Thank you. If we could go back to your statement at paragraph 39 at CRW 998-002-0559. And you've mentioned at paragraph 39 that Mr. Derek Burling controls the investigation and compliance staff within both teams, surveillance and security. That's correct?
That's correct.
Do you see that as having that merged reporting line as compromising the independence of surveillance?
I don't see that.
How many positions in surveillance report to Mr. Burling?
2 positions.
And then in paragraph 40, you mention a number of functions of the compliance and investigation staff within the security team that are managed by Mr. Burling. And the first at paragraph 40, subsection A, is concerned with the iTrack reports. Are they the reports that you spoke about earlier?
That's correct.
And I think it was your evidence earlier that the security team don't have full visibility of iTrack.
That's correct.
Does Mr. Burling have full visibility of iTrack?
I believe he does.
And in paragraph 40A, and the iTrack reports mentioned there, are you referring to the automatically generated daily iTrack reports that go to the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries?
So there is reference to the reports generated from a reporting obligations perspective, which is inclusive of those daily reports.
And do you see those daily reports before they go to the department?
No, I don't.
And I gather from paragraph 40 subsection A that they include casino matters as well as liquor matters.
Yes.
Then looking at paragraph 40 subsection B, what are the gaming keys that you're referring to there?
So they're particularly related to accessing drop boxes under tables, so the box that will take cash. Also keys that have accessibility to the inner workings, particularly the cash boxes within gaming machines.
Thank you. And then paragraph 40 subsection C, you refer to dealing with lost property. How many staff are dedicated to dealing with the thousands of lost items per month that you mentioned there?
So we've got one lost property officer, but they are supported by the security team because they're not a 24/7 position. And so when there is multiple issues around property where there might be a number of patrons asking for property at the same time, the lady that's responsible for that will engage the services of the broader team to assist.
And in paragraph 40 subsection D, you refer to compliance and investigation staff within the security team liaising with law enforcement. Which law enforcement agencies do they liaise with?
The WA Police, the Australian Federal Police, and the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, the ACIC. We sometimes will have inquiries from other policing agencies across the country, but that's few and far between. Particularly, it is the West Australian Police and the Australian Federal Police.
Thank you. What about AUSTRAC?
No.
And who is the liaison with AUSTRAC done within the Crown Perth management, do you know?
I'm not aware at the moment, only historical.
So when you use the term in 40 subsection D liaise, are you describing a close working relationship, a collaborative relationship, or what, how would you expand on describing the relationship?
I would say definitely a collaborative relationship with law enforcement, quite regular conversation, engagement with those groups, particularly by my investigative team, Derek, and the team that reports to him.
Are there regular formal meetings, or is it done on an as needed basis?
There are regular meetings that are set up with the money laundering squad, but just by the nature of the relationship and our engagement, there is historically no formalised setup of meetings that you would meet on a fortnightly or quarterly basis, because the interaction was quite regular anyway.
And the regular meetings with the money laundering squad, is that with the WA Police squad?
Is, yes.
And who from Crown Perth would attend those meetings?
So that is usually Derek Burling, Mr. Burling, Danielle Slattery, who's the AML compliance manager at Crown Perth, and that's probably the two key people. Sometimes an investigator may join them if it's to discuss a particular individual, but generally it's Mr. Burling and Miss Slattery.
And when you say an investigator, do you mean from the security department or the surveillance department?
Security.
And do the surveillance team have any liaise with law enforcement at all, or just security?
They do, but it's usually related specifically to the provision of CCTV footage. So law enforcement will they may send an order to produce through to surveillance directly, asking for footage to be provided. So they will engage with the relevant law enforcement officer or officers to ensure that that's been provided as per the OTP in the time. At times, the police will directly engage with surveillance to have access to the monitoring room to observe something that's happening live with a person of interest, or to go back and look at something historical on footage around someone's behaviour.
Would you know if police were on site?
Yes.
Would Mr. Burling know if police were on site?
Yes.
And would you know if Mr. Burling was meeting with WA Police off-site, or not necessarily?
Sorry, was that off-site?
Yes, off-site.
Mr. Burling will usually advise me when he's engaging with law enforcement. It might not happen all the time. I'm unsure of that.
So it's possible there might be occasions he meets with law enforcement that you're not aware of.
That's correct.
Mr. Burling reports to you.
Yes, that's correct.
Do you have regular meetings with him?
Yes.
They're
Scheduled.
one-on-one meetings?
One-on-one meetings.
And how often do you have those?
They're scheduled in weekly. Yeah.
Is there a written protocol within the security area in relation to the contact with law enforcement?
There is a operating procedure governing the a liaison with law enforcement agencies, yes.
I'll show you a document, CRW 700 025 1169. Have you seen that document before?
Yes, I have.
I'll just ask the operator to scroll through slowly so that Mr. Lee can re-familiarise himself with it. And on the last page, you can see that it's been approved by you amongst other people in April this year, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Is this the document you were referring to as the protocol?
There is another one that was that runs sort of concurrently to this one with respect to law enforcement engagement, particularly relating to requests for information and orders to produce, because it's inclusive of the anti-money laundering or the financial crimes team within Crown.
Okay, thank you. If we go back to the first page of this document, thank you. And at 2.1, it talks generally about how Crown Perth recognises the importance of a cooperative working relationship with law enforcement,
Yes.
state and federal. And then at 2.1.2 about procedures with respect to management and release of information to law enforcement agencies.
Yes.
And then if we go to 3.1, in the procedures, there's some general statements about how records are to be released to law enforcement when they've inquired about particular matters. Is that fair?
Yes, fair.
We could go to 3.4 at the top of the next page, thank you. The security department is expected to maintain a register dealing with the requests and then the records that are produced to law enforcement as a result of those requests.
Yes.
And does that occur?
So the Legal Services Department maintains a Excel spreadsheet register. We maintain the information through iTrack incidents. So not in a particular register like the Legal Services team does, but there is a register of those requests.
So is the legal services team aware of all requests for information from WA Police?
Of the formal requests, where the requests are for the provision of particular records for evidentiary purposes, whether it's closed circuit TV footage, it could be hotel records, gaming records.
So by formal request, you mean in relation to, in response to notices to produce or subpoena issued by police to Crown for particular records?
Yes, that's correct.
So those are the matters that would go to the legal department?
Yes.
But I understand from your answer that there are also informal requests from WA Police for information from Crown.
That's correct.
And are those informal requests covered by this Standard Operating Procedure 8.14? Or are they outside this procedure?
Sorry, could I have a look at the broader procedure just to see what it is? Because I can only see 3.4 at the moment.
We go back to
sorry.
page 1.
Yeah, thanks. So I can't see that covered particularly in that space, but we do have a memorandum of understanding with WA Police, which would be covered in the sharing of information.
But this is a particular internal document, isn't it? To, as it says in the purpose, the aim of this policy is to provide a clear understanding of processes that's to be adopted within Crown Perth for coordinating and monitoring access to records and coordination of responses.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, would you agree, reading that purpose, it would seem to include formal and informal requests for information from WA Police?
Yes.
So would informal requests for information, what would that look like in practice?
In practice, it's generally police wanting to ascertain if a person of interest to them has visited the property. If so, is there anything that we can provide in relation to their particular activities? Do they just stay in the hotels? Do they engage in gaming behaviour? It could be that do they have a membership card, sort of ways to try and help police from an intelligence perspective in particular.
Okay, thank you. So you've articulated in that answer what the type of request is, but how would they make that informal request? What would it look like?
Sorry. That could be face-to-face conversation. It could in the form of email and also in the via a phone call.
And if they were having the face-to-face conversation, would that be with Mr. Burling?
With Mr. Burling, sometimes with me, but predominantly with Mr. Burling.
And the email conversation would be with whom?
Similarly to...
Either you or Mr. Burling?
That's correct. Also in addition to that, so one of the security investigators, he will also deal with that direct conversation with law enforcement on the more operational perspective.
What's his name?
Benjamin Mariotti.
So apart from Mr. Mariotti, yourself and Mr. Burling, there's no one else who would have telephone conversations or email conversations or face-to-face conversations with anyone from WA Police?
not in respect to investigations. The more, obviously, there are people in other positions with a broader relationship with law enforcement, but with investigations, it's particularly to those people.
And would those informal contacts for the purposes of investigations be documented anywhere?
In iTrack would be particular, if it relates to a person of interest, we create, if we don't already have a profile on that person, it's created, and any material that's relevant would be recorded in iTrack. Yeah.
Thank you. That can be taken down. Could go to paragraph 40 of your statement, thank you. And in particular, looking at 40 subsection D.
Yes.
Are you suggesting there that the sharing of intelligence and information is to assist Crown in deciding whether to ban patrons from the premises?
That in some respects, but not in all.
What other respects?
Well, it could be that there is something overtly occurred in front of the cameras of a security officer with respect to an assault or a theft, something where it's clearly evident that something has transpired, or particularly of a criminal nature, and they can be excluded without the engagement of law enforcement. The engagement of law enforcement is if, from our perspective, if there is intelligence to suggest that this person, may be engaging in criminal behaviour, we might want to, as part of building our understanding of whether this person should remain at our property or not, is engaging with law enforcement to see if there's anything of interest to them for their own purposes, but also for our decision making.
So if you were going to engage with law enforcement to find out about a particular patron, such as in the manner you've described,
Yep.
do you have a particular point of contact at WA Police, or who do you contact there to find out that information?
Derek or Mr. Burlingham and Mr. Mariotti have particular contacts that they will go to. A lot of the time, I'm not making those calls because they're running the investigation and briefing me on how things are progressing. But across a number of units within the West Australian Police, they have particular contacts they can go to.
Thank you. If we could go to paragraph 45 and 46 of your statement. You've described generally in those paragraphs that both surveillance and security teams have a role in providing WA Police with intelligence as well as evidence for WA Police investigations. Is that correct? Is that a general summary
I'd say
of what's in there? And you've mentioned previously that evidence might be CCTV footage.
Yes, that's correct.
Is that the only form of evidence that you would provide WA Police?
No, the other evidence is particularly either gaming records. It might be the patron's play, or hotel occupancy records. They're particularly the three types that we would provide to them on request.
In your experience in this position, is it usually the case that you, Mr. Mariotti or Mr. Burling, are dealing with WA Police in response to WA Police requests for information rather than the other way?
No, I would say it's a two-way street in respect to that. It's going both ways.
Could we have paragraph 28 at page 4, please? In subsection E in paragraph 28, you mentioned working with state and federal police on VIP protection matters. What do you mean by that?
So that's if we have, it could be a senior member of Parliament, it could be a overseas dignitary, or someone that's got some degree of notoriety in the public space, that those people, those individuals, will usually have a state and or federal police VIP protection team with them. So we will engage with those protection teams early on to provide them whatever assistance they need to do to understand the layout of the venue, egress, cases, the way of getting in and out of the building, and maps or anything else, sort of system trying to plan the security operation around that particular individual.
Thank you. Good. Have paragraph 37, thank you. Page 5. Now, moving to particular areas of responsibility for surveillance staff, you've described the different areas of the surveillance consoles in this paragraph.
Yes.
So I understand that the X-ray base operations and the X-ray 2 support the security functions responding to patron behaviour that threatens physical safety, effectively.
Effectively, yeah. So they'll cover all the alarms as well that come through, whether it's a fire alarm, whether it's a facial recognition hit, as we refer to it, or any duress alarms, etc. Yes.
So the facial recognition hit would be for patrons who've been banned who are attempting to get back onto the casino floor or onto the casino property.
That's correct.
And otherwise, physical safety matters would be physical altercations between patrons or on the casino floor.
Yes, that's correct.
Or the wider property.
The wider property, yes.
And is it also part of the surveillance team's role on X-ray base operations and X-ray 2 to note matters that breach the Liquor Control Act?
Yes, if they're to be looking out for that as part of their observations, yes.
So these are all matters that security are expected to respond to immediately?
Yes.
So are those the only two consoles, X-ray base operations and X-ray 2, that are rostered to watch the main gaming floor area of the casino?
They are on that's on your weekday, Friday and Saturday night. There's an added resource that is assigned to general security operations, and at times there can be another two in that space. And that's just not the casino, that's the property in general. However, you'll find that most times during the day, a majority of the activity in patron flow is through the main casino environments. That's where generally their focus will be. However, that doesn't mean that they don't look outside of that scope.
So you said that over those Friday, Saturday nights, there'd be extra added to the security team operations.
Yes.
But what about to the surveillance team console operations?
No.
So on a Friday and Saturday night, you'd still have the X-ray base operations and X-ray 2 as the only two console operators watching the main gaming floor?
Yes. However, in saying that, because surveillance has everyone in the surveillance team is trained and experienced in both surveillance activities and security activities. So if there is assistance is required further to something's come up on a table and there's some extra assistance required, anyone on because they're in the same room, one of the security consoles, one of the X-ray, can bring up a screen and assist with anything from a gaming perspective. Similarly, the other way around during the day, if there's not too much activity on the gaming floor by way of patronage or play, and there is something that arises of a serious enough security nature, they can just call out in the room and someone can bring up a console to provide support.
Thank you. Now, the Pearl Room operator at subsection D, you say there monitors the Pearl Room only.
Yes.
So that's a single surveillance operative that surveys the entire Pearl Room, including the salons and the suite.
Yes, but with that position, you've got they're responsible for that, but you can also got another operator on the consoles that can support, especially when you look at the primary breaker. But there's also I don't know if it's on the other page. There is an operator who assists with dubbing of footage for law enforcement OTP requests. So that's another asset in the room that can oversee Pearl Room and salons if there's an increased level of activity. Salons not so much these days, it's just Pearl Room.
And the suite where the EGMs are in the Pearl Room?
That's covered by that, yes.
So how many cameras approximately would the single Pearl Room operator on the console be able to select from to watch at any given time on their console?
So they could, you could, most of the time, so they've got two monitors in front of them on the console, and predominantly it is split into 4. You can go further, but you lose the capability or the quality in viewing the entirety of what's going on at the table. So up in the room, you will see operators with 2 screens up with 8 shots with activity. But what they'll also do is, because if you look at the Pearl Room, particularly at the moment, the patronage is just not where it was historically. So there's less people frequenting that area. And so the operator can narrow down. You might have the Pearl Room open at the moment and literally have 1 table in operation or 2 tables in operation. So they can bring up those 2 tables on their screen. Also on top of that, every operator will do audits in retrospect. So they'll go back on footage of tables and gaming areas and review a certain amount of hours of gaming footage to see if there's anything that they can pick up.
So if they're doing those audits, then obviously they're not looking at what's happening live through the cameras.
No, they find time to do that. So it's not just, so when I'm Pearl Room operator, I'm not running audits at the same time. I run the audits if there's no activity in the room, and you could have, particularly on night shifts, there may be very few people in the casino and maybe no one in the Pearl Room. So you've got opportunity to do that.
And do they have to meet key performance indicators in terms of how many audits they do in a particular time period?
Yeah, yes they do, yeah.
And what are they?
Over the period of a month, each operator must have a minimum of 20 hours of auditing.
At paragraph 41 on page 6, you mentioned compliance and investigation surveillance staff having a number of functions, which you set out in the sub-paragraphs. Could get those up. This is paragraph 41.
Yes.
So you've mentioned already the paragraph B, reviewing incident reports.
Yeah. Yes.
You've mentioned subsection E, the audits. Is that what you're referring to in the previous answer?
I am, yes.
And you've also mentioned assisting law enforcement in the review of footage, which is subparagraph F.
That's correct.
So these functions A through to F are all in addition to monitoring the consoles for incidents that might be happening live.
Sorry, that, if I'm reading correctly, 41, that's just for the compliance and investigative staff. That's not the operators. However, the operators at times will, if that number F, will have police officers in the room sitting with them looking through footage. That's where we can provide that support for law enforcement.
So how many compliance and investigation staff within the surveillance team are there?
There's 2, and we're just in the process of recruiting a 3rd.
So 2 to 3. And how many console operators?
32.
32. And
So
they're
32.
on shifts of 8 in each shift, is
Yes,
that correct?
yeah, and that's they're 12-hour rosters.
At subparagraph B, when you refer to reviewing incident reports the compliance investigation staff do this to ensure footage has been retained. Who makes the decision what incident reports require footage to be retained?
Everything that's every incident has footage retained on it. Yeah.
How long are they retained for?
If that is, if the footage has been dubbed for an incident, that footage is permanently retained.
So not all footage is dubbed for an incident?
If it's an incident, it's dubbed.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And then at subparagraph F, when you mentioned that they sit with law enforcement to review particular incidents, how often would that occur?
Oh, that's very few and far between. I would guesstimate that in the period of a 12-month period, you may see that half a dozen times.
Thank you. If we could have paragraph 43. And you talk about audit function of the compliance staff led by surveillance operations. So is this the audit function you're talking about that the console operators perform when they're not busy?
Yes, that's a combination of both the compliance staff and the surveillance operations. Yep.
Now, back to paragraph 41, thank you. When you're talking about the reports to the external regulator,
Yes.
I think I've got the wrong paragraph there. I'll ask you generally about it. So you have mentioned, or earlier this morning, the daily reports to the regulator, by
Yes.
which I mean the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries. Can you elaborate on how matters are put into those reports? Who makes that decision?
So that is, it was directed by the department with respect to our obligations to report to them on particular matters. So within iTrack, you have it's called an ad hoc report. You've got the ability to set filters, and those filters will identify the matters which are to be reported to the department, and that's what gets disseminated each morning to them.
So the filters were particularly requested by the department? Is that what
Yes.
you're saying?
Yes.
And when did that request come through?
That was, I'm guessing, the facility of 8-9 years ago.
Right, so a number of years ago.
Yeah.
Have the filters changed at all over that time, to your knowledge?
I am aware that recently there was I wasn't completely involved in it, but there was a discussion around filters and reportable incidents to the government to ensure that what we were reporting is what we were obliged to report. Not to say that we weren't reporting accurately before, but there were some discussions around matters that may have been outside of gaming-related incidents. But I'm not particularly au fait with the specifics of that, or what may or may not have changed.
When you say recently, how recently?
I would say within the last 12-month period.
You say you weren't completely involved in it. Did you have some involvement in it?
No, not that I can recall anyway.
Or how do you know that this occurred then?
It was a discussion, Derek Burling had raised it at some point in, and also one of the surveillance analysts had raised it about the amendments of filters.
And to your knowledge, were the filters amended to remove matters from the report or to add matters to the report?
I'm unsure.
So that would be a matter we could ask Mr. Burling about?
Yes.
Could go to paragraph 68, thank you. Perhaps before I go into these type of reports, could I just ask you generally, the investigations that are undertaken by both surveillance and security, what would trigger them? Why would you start one?
It's twofold. It's either we've operationally identified something, or it's been reported to us by another party, whether it's external being law enforcement or whether it's another internal department.
So what type of investigations would internal departments request that you undertake?
It's quite broad ranging. It could be everything from there is a Bell Services, they want us to investigate footage to see whether there was damage to a vehicle that was the cause of our staff or the driver. It could be the staff cafeteria area and whether someone's taken another sandwich they weren't supposed to, through to, in front of me now, matters where there could be, sorry, I was digressing to outside of internal reporting. Yeah, internal reporting is on those types of sort of matters.
So they tend to be quite low-level matters.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, looking at paragraph 68. and you discussed the pathway for the unusual activity reports, or UARs, at Crown, and you say they all get reported to the surveillance team, is that correct?
Yes, the UARs were through, there would be a distribution group. Surveillance were one of those when a UAR. Now they still get through to surveillance, but through an online portal, which is an online template through the financial crimes team.
So the surveillance team would see every UAR that's filled out at Crown Perth.
I don't know about every UAR. I know that we engage with the financial crimes team on a regular basis, where they're sending us on a pretty much, it could be a daily basis, a name of a person and an activity that they want us to have a look at for them. But and I know that each UAR that surveillance put in, that they have observation on through the portal, but I'm unsure.
Not sure
As to
whether
whether-
surveillance sees everyone that's filed within the whole of Crown Perth.
Yep, I think it leads to when the investigations commence, then they would definitely be involved in that, because we do that at the moment.
And who reports the UARs to surveillance that surveillance gets to see?
From what I'm aware, the majority of the UARs through our cage area, transactional cage reporting. Yeah,
What percentage would come from the cage that you see at surveillance?
I'm unsure of the percentages with respect to cage.
And you mentioned that they're filed. Where are they filed before they're reported through to surveillance?
Oh, sorry. To clarify, the reports when a UAR is completed, it's immediately uploaded through a portal, which they would have that accessibility to. There's not matters that are filed and then at a later date tabled with surveillance. If there's something that needs to be looked at, surveillance will be engaged to look at that immediately.
So they're not hard copy forms, they're online
Yes.
portal forms.
Yes.
And how long has that process been in place?
In the last 6 months. They've come into
So
place.
prior to the last 6 months, did the surveillance get UARs?
Yes.
And was that in a hard copy form?
Yes. And it would be through the email, and a copy of the UAR template would be saved in the iTrack incident. There's a media tab, and the media tab is where you will, where the connection to footage will be, with a connection to photos or UARs in this respect.
And if the surveillance area received one by email, where would it have come from? What other department? Would it be from the person who had observed the activity, emailing it to surveillance, or would it go through another department before it comes to surveillance?
It wouldn't go through another department. It would come
Straight to
Straight.
surveillance.
Yep.
So then 6 months ago, you would have been seeing surveillance would have been seeing every UAR that had been filled out.
yes, from what I'm aware.
And then once it comes to surveillance, what happens then?
Surveillance will usually have a look at the transaction or the behaviour around the individual. It could be just to confirm that yes, there was something that was there was the transaction that took place, but was there anything else outside of that? So they'll be observing the patron's behaviour, not just at the transactional point, but where they were prior to that, any other activity they were engaging in, any other persons that we deemed as associates that might then become persons of interest, just by nature of having some association with that person.
So surveillance would look at your historical holdings, in
Yes.
effect, and also look at the incident that at the time on the console that had been stored.
Yes.
And when in that process, from the time that you receive it in the surveillance area, the UAR, and that mini investigation's done, is there any point in that process in which the AML team are notified?
The AML team are notified at the time.
That's through the portal?
Yeah, and there's the portal, but there's also just the engagement between the teams. Our AML, or financial crimes team, surveillance and security investigators will talk very regularly with respect to UARs and tying in with persons of interest.
So before there was a portal, so forget the last 6 months, prior to that, when there wasn't a portal, at what stage would the surveillance team engage with the AML team to let them know they've received a UAR?
I'm unsure of that. I know that they would discuss these matters at the person of interest subcommittees. I'm confident they would have had discussions outside of that, but it was more formalised in the POI subcommittees.
And how often was the POI subcommittee?
Every fortnight.
So it could be that surveillance team had received a UAR and had held it for 10 to 14 days prior to informing AML at the POI subcommittee.
No, I don't believe that would have happened. The POI subcommittee was the formal opportunity to catch up and review the matters that had come up throughout that fortnight, but the surveillance team, with whether it's the makeup of the AML team now or the historical team, there would have been interaction almost immediately with respect to these matters.
And what form would that interaction take?
Email would be a lot of emails and phone calls, I'd say, and in-person catch-ups.
Between the surveillance team and someone in the AML team?
Yes.
Who in particular in the AML team would be the person that they would catch up with?
Now we're speaking now because there's been some movement in the teams over the years. So now you've got Danielle Slattery, the AML compliance manager, Chrissy Hart, who is AML officer. So they would have those conversations with them. Historically, it was Caroline Galati, Chris Theodopoulos, Julie Anderson, a few other people that were in that position.
Thank you. So in the last 6 months, you've had the portal running, and do I understand it that the AML team would get the notification of the UAR at the same time that surveillance received it?
Yeah, should do.
So prior to that 6 months is what I'm talking about, when there were these, you've referred to them as catch-ups between the surveillance team and someone in the AML team. And you say that catch-up would be in the form of an email or a telephone call?
Yeah, and that would happen on receipt of the UAR.
Apart from a telephone call or email, was there any formal way of informing AML team that you in surveillance had received a UAR? Was there a register?
I'm unaware if the AML team would maintain that if there was one, not within this surveillance space. We would have an iTrack incident to record UARs. So it was likely a concurrent sort of reporting or recording system.
And in the iTrack incident space, would there be some filter that you could attach to that particular incident to say it was an AMR report?
Yes.
And was there some way of capturing all those AMR reports to create a regular report just dealing with those UAR matters?
You could do that. You could. I'm not aware of one being produced, but if requested, you could, through the filters, identify how many UARs and look at it from a trend perspective.
But you're not aware that happened, so I'm talking prior to the last 6 months. You're not aware that it would happen regularly, that type of report would be lifted from the iTrack system? I'm
not aware of that. The AML team and other departments do have accessibility to incident reports. They're not always got accessibility to the footage retained within that incident, but they have got accessibility because what you can do on an iTrack incident is you tick positions or you tick departments to open it up. So when it comes to financial crime, AML matters, security, AML, and surveillance would have would be able to observe that incident. So if the AML team may have historically reported on that through other channels, but not through me, because they don't report to me, but they could do that.
But as I understand it, putting aside the last 6 months, the AML team would only know to go into iTrack to look at an AML report if they've been told by email or telephone from someone in surveillance that there was one to look at. Is that correct?
I'm unsure of whether AML were included in the historical reports or not. I know that my team dealt with them on a frequent basis, but I don't have visibility on that.
And how would UARs find their way into the Person of Interest Subcommittee agenda?
That would be brought forward by the, particularly from the financial crimes team, the AML team.
And where would the financial crimes team get that information from?
They'd get that from the portal. Now they're reporting through the portal.
And prior to the last 6 months, where would they get that information from?
They could get that information from iTrack.
Because the financial crimes team have access to that in iTrack, do they?
Yes.
Are you aware of Crown Perth receiving a letter from AUSTRAC on the 1st of December 2020 querying a drop in the number of suspicious matter reports being reported from Crown Perth? Are you aware of the process of UARs becoming suspicious matter reports? How that comes into being?
I just recall the, again, I would say within approximately the last sort of 6 month period, maybe 6 to 12 months ago, being advised of the change in sort of terminology from an SMR to UAR.
So from your point of view, an SMR, suspicious matter report, is the same thing as a UAR?
Well, the UAR is the unusual activity report, so that could be, no, there's separate reporting.
So what I'm asking you is, do you have any visibility or any knowledge about how an unusual activity report might become a suspicious matter report for the purposes of AUSTRAC reporting?
Not particularly for the purposes of AUSTRAC reporting. I'm aware of what generally could be seen to be what would be defined as suspicious. Usually it's around behavioural, and usually that's out of, you could have a transaction that's a straight transaction where the patron wasn't necessarily aware of what they can transact or not, but there could be on the surveillance review some added sort of behaviours or an associate they meet with where you think, well, this is actually adding something more to this, which becomes suspicious.
Okay. And if that was the case, how would that be communicated to the AML team, or would it be communicated?
I know that'd be communicated to the AML team directly, likely through Mr. Burling or Mr. Mariotti to Miss Slattery or one of her team to advise them of the nature of the broader suspicions that we've picked up. And that would be done without waiting for a POI subcommittee.
Does the AML team do its own investigations of unusual activity reports, or do they request that to be done by the surveillance area?
They request the surveillance area.
Were you aware of, in December 2020, that there are about 25 UARs awaiting investigation at Crown Perth? Not aware of that?
So sorry, just in relation to the investigation, surveillance investigation is the interrogation of footage in particular. The AML team will have their own areas, I'm sure, broader than that with respect to the financial matters, but surveillance's assistance in that space is particularly focused on footage.
And also you've mentioned previously the historical records that might be held on iTrack would be interrogated by surveillance as well.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, and also if we have in the iTrack report anything that's that assists the AML team in their investigation, if there's any engagement with law enforcement, historical engagement.
Is that a convenient time? Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mrs. Nelson. Mr. Lee, we'll have a break of about 15 minutes, so we'll let you at 35. Thank you very much.
All rise.
please be seated. Thank you, Ms Nelson.
Thank you, Commissioner. Could I have document CRW 700 025 1169, which is the policy liaison with law enforcement agencies, which we did look at before the break. If we go to the next page, 1170, thank you. And the 3.4 talks about Security and Surveillance Department maintaining a register dealing with request and dissemination of records provided to law enforcement agencies. And I think it was your evidence that that register is not maintained by Security and Surveillance, it's maintained by the legal area, is that correct?
That's correct.
And the records that would be disseminated to law enforcement agencies and then placed in the register, the record placed in the register, what type of records would they be?
Predominantly, and maybe in its entirety, CCTV footage, gaming records. So if a person's been playing, anything associated with that, and at times there are hotel records with respect to their booking and their stays and any spend in the hotel space.
So hard copy records and CCTV footage.
Yes, that's correct.
Is it the case that all instances where that type of material, those type of records are provided to law enforcement, in each instance is that recorded by legal?
Yes, yeah. No, I'm not in legal services, so I can't comment on the accuracy of that because it's not from surveillance and security, but the legal team do maintain a register.
You also said prior to the break that Mr Mariotti and Mr Burling would sometimes have face-to-face conversations or email or telephone conversations with particular contacts within the West Australian Police Force. You're nodding your head.
Yes, sorry.
And you said that might happen off-site, off-Crown site.
Yeah, that would happen very rarely, but in respect to the question you had earlier about off-site and whether Mr Burling would advise me all of those occasions, they may have meetings off-site in one of the policing, like central police station, but that would happen few and far between.
Are you aware of Mr Burling or Mr Mariotti ever providing WA Police with CCTV footage through that process rather than going through the legal department and getting that record registered?
No.
You're not aware of that?
No.
Are there any security and surveillance employees from Crown that actually work off-site, or do they all work on the Crown Perth site?
The only employees that work off-site that I'm aware of is our security training team. They've got a facility in Welshpool which we run our training from.
And so would CCTV footage be provided to that training facility?
The manager has access to, so he can request from surveillance footage because he's been advised of a particular matter where security may have executed a technique which wasn't in accordance with their training. If that happens, then the training manager will ask for that footage. Surveillance put that in a separate folder which he can access to look through so he has no control of the cameras, but he can look at that footage to determine what training might need to be undertaken, and he will liaise with the surveillance because that footage is not held there forever. That is removed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So is that training that happens at that Welshpool site, is that use of force training?
It's broader than that, but there is use of force training there. So,
thank you, that can be taken down. In your statement, you referred to a list of documents, and one of those is a 64-page table, which I'll just get up on screen, but if it could only be shown to Council, CRW 001 001 3150. Now, it's very small writing, but
Yeah.
you can see at the top, it says, I think, 2020.
Yes, I can. Oh, yes, at the top, yes, I can see that.
But apart from that, it doesn't have a title. What information is in this table?
So I could be zoomed in just a little bit more so I can. Thank you. Oh, and just to the right, it appears that that's a register for formal requests of information.
Is it a register that you compiled?
No.
And did you refer to it when you were making your statement?
No. Oh, sorry. Can you pan out to the small view? Sorry, in what context to the compilation of the statement?
But it's at the end of your statement, there is a list of 55 documents.
Oh, yes, yes.
Documents to which the witness has referred or was referred for the purpose of providing this statement.
Sorry, yes, in that respect, the POI, so I've gone through the person of interest records, which has this document, but also has some historical references to persons of interest. Yep.
So whose document is this? Who compiled it?
That is a document that has accessibility from the financial crimes team, the AML team, and security, so they can input information into that document so that it's maintained from a live perspective.
So is this document maintained by the security team or by the financial crimes team?
Financial crimes team.
But you say the security team can input data into it?
Yes, they can. And then that's discussed at some of the details that are inputted, especially some of the new persons of interest, are discussed at the next POI committee, unless there's some degree of urgency to discuss it earlier.
And does everyone on the POI or the person of interest committee have access to this document?
I believe so.
But had you seen it before prior to compiling a statement for the Royal Commission?
I've seen person of interest spreadsheets, which may be this one. As I say, they're all the same format of an Excel spreadsheet covering a number of years. So.
Now, how would a patron find their way onto this table?
It could, well, from law enforcement inquiries, they will typically be added to this POI spreadsheet, and matters that relate more to serious and organised crime behaviour, whether it's money laundering, whether it's organised crime, possible behaviour with reference to drugs or gang-related activity.
So, suspected criminal activity and suspected money laundering type activities would cause a patron to have their name on this spreadsheet
Yes.
table.
Yeah.
So looking at column D and E, could just zoom in so we can see what the title is of those two columns. Thank you, operator. So when it says POI, are they only patrons of Crown Perth?
I don't believe that that they are only persons that have attended our property, that are members or have attended on a more sort of regular basis, not generalised persons of interest from the broader perspective.
So if a patron name does not appear in this document, would it be correct to say that Crown Perth hasn't been asked about that patron by law enforcement, or that patron hasn't come to notice for criminal activity or money laundering?
The only reason that we should be recording details in the register is if the request has come from law enforcement, or we've identified something internally that we think this person needs to be particularly looked at, and so they've been added to the register.
And this person being a patron or someone who frequents Crown Perth?
Yes. Yep.
Are you aware of a Crown Perth patron by the name of Daniel Petkov?
I'm superficially aware of that name, and that's historical in respect to media reporting at the time, but I can't recall any, apart from seeing his name, anything recent that I've had any dealings with that person.
So as far as you can recall, you first heard his name around media reporting?
Yes.
In doing a search on this table, there appears to be one notification from March 2018 with Mr Petkov's name on it, where the WA Police have asked for gaming records and Mr Petkov's self-exclusion information.
Okay.
Were you aware of WA Police in March 2018 asking for that information?
If they did, it wasn't through me.
Thank you, that can be taken down. You're a member of the Responsible Gaming Revocation Committee.
That's correct.
I just want to show you the charter for that committee, CRW 700 005 0036. If we could go to the next page, thank you. How long have you been on this committee?
Since the committee, since its inception, which would have been approximately around the time of the charter being produced. Prior to that, for a number of years before the committee was formed, I was part of a group of people that would be sent a particular report to provide commentary on for the purposes of consideration of revocation. Since this inception of this committee, which includes it's Perth-based, but there is group representation through 2 psychologists in Melbourne that are online. I've been part of it since it started.
And what input do you provide to reports that go to this committee in relation to particular patrons seeking to come back to Crown Perth?
So it's really mirroring what I would have done prior to the committee being formed, which is receiving an internal report from the responsible gaming team on the history of the patron, including their engagement with that patron. That includes if the patron has attempted or breached at any stage. And also there is a report from the Gambling Help WA where the patron has had conversations with. So there's 2 reports. I will read through those reports and then provide my views.
Thank you, that can be taken down. Just in relation to people who are banned from the property, are you aware of a Mr. Simon Pan who was banned at Crown Melbourne but was able to come to Crown Perth on several occasions over 2019?
I'm aware of that.
2020, January 2021.
Yes, I'm aware of that name.
Did your area conduct any investigation into how a patron who was banned in Melbourne was able to come to the Pearl Room in Perth?
When we looked at, there was an email that was forwarded from Crown Melbourne to myself whilst our property was on was closed because of COVID, and that email was requesting for us to exclude Mr. Pan, but in noting that there was a period of time between when he was excluded in Melbourne compared to when we were notified to exclude him in Perth.
I'll show you CRW 512-045-0210. Perhaps we could go to the last page. Is this the email you're referring to?
No. No, the email I was referring to was a direct email from Adam Sutherland, who was in the AML team in Melbourne, asking me to exclude Mr. Pan. There was some mention of adverse media reporting and that he had been excluded in Melbourne. So I just actioned through my team the exclusion.
Would that have been around the middle of 2019, do you think?
I believe that's accurate.
So what was the reason why Mr. Pan was then able to enter the Pearl Room in December 2020 for the next 2 weeks after that on 21 times?
We had, this is after the exclusion was issued. We had, if I talk from my team's perspective in surveillance, we had a issue with the facial recognition technology software, which helps us or assists us in identifying excluded persons. The system had an issue where, from a memory perspective, it was pulling photos and bringing them out of the live detection system and putting them into subfolders, which we've addressed through the software provider, but that's what caused, that was one reason what caused us to not identify him entering towards the Pearl Room as an excluded person. The other matter related to the application of stop codes in the system referred to as psycho, where we apply stop codes to which then puts a ban on that person's membership or getting mailing and other sorts of determinations. So there was an issue there, which is subsequently rectified.
To get into the Pearl Room, Mr. Pan would have to first present at the Pearl Room reception.
He would.
And present identification.
He would.
And at that point in time, does the Pearl Room receptionist or host access the psycho system?
Yes, they do.
And is that where the issue was, that there wasn't a stop code at that point in time, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, not on. He had multiple accounts and security had applied accounts to not all the accounts.
Is it usual for patrons at the Pearl Room to have multiple accounts on Psycho?
I'm not familiar with the depths of Psycho and multiple accounts. I know that the term multiple accounts has been discussed with respect to the PAN matter. I'm not aware of how broad that is and whether that's just a general thing for Pearl members or not.
Who managed that investigation into the Simon Pan incident to determine how it came to be that he was in the Pearl Room whilst banned in Melbourne?
There were a number of, I think there was a number of people reviewing from their department's perspective what went wrong, sorry, I can't recall if there was one particular person, but I know that Lonnie Bossy, my direct report, who I report to, was obviously overseen to ensure that we're identifying what went on, why this happened, and how we can rectify the issues. But we were talking as a group with every party that where there was an issue.
Do you know if it's still possible in Psycho for one patron to have multiple accounts?
I know that our IT team have been working extensively to identify those issues, but I'm not educated in that space to comment in full.
Okay, thank you. Now, in your statement, you also say that you're a member of the Person of Interest Committee, and we've talked about that a little bit this morning. Could go to CRW 99800205559 at page 14. By a Person of Interest subcommittee, how is that different to the Person of Interest Committee in makeup?
The Person of Interest Committee, as we have it now, is a group approach. So we've got representatives from Perth, Melbourne, and Sydney that meet every 3 weeks, and that is discussing persons of interest that the group will make some determination on what action needs to be taken with respect to, are they immediately excluded? Is there a source of wealth, or is there something else we need to determine whether we're going to continue or even engage with business? Some of the names that go before the group POI committee are names that have been drawn from media reporting that may never visit our property, but we exclude them proactively. The Person of Interest subcommittee is Perth specific and discussing individuals that as I mentioned earlier, at the Perth property. If we exclude those persons, then that's shared from a group perspective, but yeah, that's the difference in the committees.
So the decision to exclude those persons is made at Crown Perth, and then it's just communicated to the Person of Interest Committee at a group level?
Yes.
And you talk there in paragraph 124 about one of the main functions of the subcommittee is to formally facilitate the efficient dissemination of information between security, surveillance and AML departments.
Yes.
And what type of information are you talking about?
The information is predominantly relating to if they're, reasonably broad, the information could be determined from CCTV information through the lens of a camera that we've identified. So we're discussing that in that context. It could be whether it's a UAR related. It could be that law enforcement information that's come through, or complaints from a third party that we discuss.
And if it's CCTV footage, does everyone on the subcommittee get to see that footage?
It's not there in the room, but if we need to move to a separate room in surveillance to observe it, then the group can do that.
want to take you to some recent POI group committee meeting minutes from the 22nd of February 2021. And if this document could just be visible to the council table and the commissioner, thank you. CRW 510 001 1117. So you can see there's a meeting of the 22nd of February 2021 at 4:30 p.m. The chairperson is Michelle Fielding.
Yes.
And then there's a list of invitees that include Crown Melbourne people as well as Crown Perth managers.
That's correct.
And you can see there that in the apologies that you and Mr Walsh are an apology for that meeting.
Yes.
Would you have seen the meeting minutes?
Yes.
On that basis, I just want to ask you generally about the risk ratings that are applied to particular people in this meeting minutes. And I'd ask for a non-publication order to the extent that it's necessary for any names that are visible of persons of interest. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Noting that this is only available to the council team and the Commissioner. So we could go to page 3. So you can see the last row. I don't want you to say anyone's name, but the patron name is in a column, and then there's an alleged crime / indiscretion / behaviour, and that person has been charged with 296 counts of money laundering by the Kuala Lumpur Sessions Court.
Yes.
You see the row I'm referring to?
Yes.
What I want to ask you about is the patron privilege column where it says Gold GM member TG. What does that mean?
That's referring to the level of membership they have if they're with the group. So let's say in that particular patron, gold brackets gaming machines referring to gaming machines, and then TG from a table games perspective, and one's gaming machine that is a gold level tier, and table games as a member.
Thank you. Can you explain in the AML risk rating column where it says this person has a low risk rating, how those risk ratings are applied?
There is a form that is completed. If I wish to put a name before the Group POI Committee, I complete a form, and that form, the matrix determines a risk rating, and that risk rating is tabled before the groups. That's how it works it out.
And what is so obviously there's low, is there a tier bit below low, or is low the least risk?
So I don't recall what levels there are, if there's any below low.
Can you recall what specific criteria would cause you to rate someone's risk from an AML perspective as low?
No, I'm just trying to recall completion of one of those documents in the matrix, but I know that one of the columns that or one of the areas that we do fill in is, or do notice if there's any law enforcement interest, if there's any historical issues with respect to that person on site behaviour.
Is there discussion within the POI committee about someone's risk rating that, for example, you might have assigned when you put someone up to that committee?
From what I can recall, it's mainly discussed is the alleged crime and indiscretion behaviour, that column, and based on the seriousness of those matters, the determination is predominantly to exclude. I don't recall with those list of names having a discussion around the AML or the PDA tool rating. I think that became something that wasn't really discussed because of what you can see in front of you and the alleged crime behaviour and the seriousness of that.
What's the PDA tool rating? What does that mean?
The PDA is that form that you complete, and that gives you the rating.
So it seems unusual to me that a person who has been charged with 296 counts of money laundering is an AML risk rating of low.
Yeah, I don't know how the team comes to those ratings.
I thought I understood you to say that if you were putting a person of interest up, you would fill in the PDA form and assign a risk.
Yeah, that's right. So there's the PDA tool rating, which is that form that I would complete. The AML risk rating, I believe, is the financial crimes team doing a separate to the PDA assessment.
Right.
But I'm unsure of that process.
So a medium PDA tool rating, what does that mean? What type of factors are you assessing when you give this person a medium rating?
From my recollection of completion of the form, it is around history at the property. If there's anything that has come up in any reporting from an ITRAC perspective, or otherwise any law enforcement engagement. So there's fields that you'll populate to say yes, no, and whenever you fill that, it calculates it at the bottom.
So this person may or may not come out at the end of this committee meeting with a decision attached to whether they should be banned at Crown Perth.
Even with low and medium, with the nature of the alleged crimes, the low and medium references, I can't see them being discussed as being any degree of consideration based on the alleged crime. We'd have moved to exclusion.
Thank you. Could go to page 10, line 16. Now this is a person from Western Australia who's been sentenced by the District Court to 128 months in prison for drug trafficking in 2005. Possession of methamphetamine and ecstasy with intent to sell or supply. And again, they have a low AML risk rating and a medium PDA tool rating.
Yes, see that.
What was the attitude generally of the committee to people who have drug offences?
I wasn't obviously at that one. It was an apology, but if I talk more generally, that's exclusion. It's not even a discussable point.
Does a player's gaming turnover figure into the discussions at the person of interest committee as to whether they should be still allowed onto the premises?
No.
That can be taken down, thank you. We could go back to Mr. Lee's statement, which is at CRW 998-002-0559, and we could go to paragraph 153 to 155. You're talking about loan sharking. What do you understand loan sharking to be?
It's the lending of, could start with the lending of money, but there's a percentage return on the lending So it's not just lending for the purposes of if I lend you a particular amount, that you'll pay me that particular amount back. Loan sharking is that I will hold an item of property until you repay me, and or there's going to be let's say for instance a 10% week by week increase. So it's not lending, it moves into the loan sharking space.
And you say at paragraph 155, we took steps to exclude people suspected of loan sharking from the premises.
Yes, that's correct.
So is it the case that you wouldn't need to have conclusive evidence of loan sharking before they'd be excluded?
No, all of those, when I refer to those cases, back then, there was, now, I think at the time when we had a particular issue around the Pearl Room with that behaviour, I think I was head of security at the time, so my boss, to put it that way at the time, was dealing quite extensively with that area and having conversations to try and identify who were the people that were engaging in this type of behaviour. We were executing a lot of monitoring of these persons of interest, but the ones that we identified that were loan sharking, because there was evidence to suggest that, they were excluded.
I understand there's a loan sharking policy.
Yes.
Have you seen that?
Sorry, no, there's one respect to lending that's recently, some policy around lending, but I can't recall a loan sharking policy.
I'll show you a document then, CRW 004-012-2416. And this is a policy from 2015.
Okay, yeah.
Have you seen this policy before?
I believe I have, yeah, some time ago, not recently.
And looking at 2.1, where it says loan sharking activities are regarded as unacceptable behaviour and will not be tolerated.
Yes.
So it would generally result in a banning from the property
Yes.
for a period of time or for a permanent ban?
Most of the time it's a minimum of 2 years. That was always a view on that. But it's 2 years before they can write basically to me to ask for revocation. In most instances, in the vast majority, if not all, that's extended past a 2 year period.
Thank you. That can be taken down. I want to ask you about a particular patron. There's a list of patron pseudonyms in front of you. So I want to ask you about patron S.
Yes.
I don't want you to say the patron's name.
Yep.
Are you aware of patron S's patronage at Crown Perth?
I am.
And are you aware of that in the context of allegations of loan sharking?
That patron, I can't recall her specifically being mentioned as undertaking those activities particularly, but that name was around that period of the 8-9 years ago came up amongst a number of other names, and there was other names around that person that were excluded as a result of clear evidence of that loan sharking activity, but not that patron.
Are you aware of whether patron S is still able to come to Crown Perth?
No, I excluded that patron I think earlier last year, I believe. So they are excluded, so not permitted entry to the property in any terms.
And was that for loan sharking activities or allegations, or money laundering allegations, or some other reason?
No, so there was twofold. There was happened almost simultaneously was an email from Nick Stokes, who's the group general manager of AML in Melbourne. So Nick emailed me and with a table and some questions around, just to let you know, this person has a certain amount of reporting that was deemed to be, I can't remember whether it was the UARs, but there was some concerns from that space and why they are still allowed entry into the property. And I actually hadn't heard that patron's name raised for a period of time prior to receiving that email, but there obviously been some transactions. At the same time, I had a informal discussion with WA Police with regards to another matter, and they raised this patron, and it wasn't. It was based on a police investigation that appeared to be a drawn-out process with this person, and there may be. They believe that they were laundering through a restaurant, but weren't mentioning anything about the casino, but there was some illegal activity they believe was taking part of that person's restaurant. So based on the police concerns, which had never arisen historically in all the conversations that I had over a period of years with law enforcement with respect to this person, every now and again the name would pop up, and I would engage with law enforcement to see whether there was anything that we should know about or otherwise. And it wasn't there until this most recent discussion. And then clearly on Nick's email to see, I think there was just the amount of, I believe it was UARs or SMRs, the decision was made. I made the decision to exclude.
And Nick Stokes is located in Melbourne at Crown, isn't he?
That's right, in the Group AML function. So he oversaw the 3 properties.
Does he have access to iTrack in Crown Perth?
No.
How would he have found out about notifications in relation to Patron S at Crown Perth?
I'm unsure. I can only, his reports reside in Perth, so they must have a separate reporting line through that.
Are you aware of how many years this patron had been coming to Crown Perth?
Not accurately, with respect to years, but some time.
The information, I'm just going to put to you a chronology, and it comes from a document CRW.700.085.3902, but I don't want that document up on the screen, thank you, just for the purposes of transcript. On the 3rd of July 2009, there was information received by Crown Perth that a patron in the Pearl Room was complaining about loan sharking in the Pearl Room by Patron S. And a month later, in August 2009, this was corroborated by a second patron. You're nodding your head. Are you aware of this history?
No, I'm just acknowledging that you're talking about it.
You don't have any particular knowledge yourself about the notifications in relation to Patron S?
No.
And on the 11th of June 2013, there was contact between Crown Perth and WA Police Major Crime Squad in relation to Patron S. Would that have been you making contact with WA Police in 2013?
I can't recall if that was me or my boss at the time.
Who was your boss at the time?
Mike McGreevy.
And then between June 2013 for the remainder of that year, there are 3 other notifications in relation to loan sharking by Patron S. In 2014, there are another 3 notifications in relation to loan sharking. And notifications would have been made, for them to be on the system, they would have been made by security or surveillance, wouldn't they?
Sorry, the notifications to the police, or?
Well, these are notifications from iTrack. This is a history, a chronology of the notifications within Crown Perth's holdings?
Yeah, so security or surveillance typically would, if there was any concerns about that patron, would be noting that in iTrack.
Then in 2015, there are approximately 10 notifications in Crown's holdings about patroness and loan sharking behaviour. Can you understand why patron S wasn't banned at this point in time?
I know that over a period of time when that patron's name was tabled with security and or surveillance at the time, that the matters were looked into, and I know historically from Mr McGreevy's perspective, he was talking to patrons in the Pearl Room around loan sharking in general, and some of those patrons he was talking to were the ones that were making a complaint that someone was engaging in that type of behaviour they were a victim to. And that patron's name had come up, as I mentioned before, over a number of years, up until particularly a certain point, and then from my recollection it sort of stopped. But each time that patron's behaviour was reviewed by surveillance, and contact was made with also law enforcement.
On each of these occasions, well, during the years that I've already mentioned, the risk rating from an AML perspective for patron S was listed as significant in AML committee meetings.
Okay.
Does that cause you some concern that the patron was not banned at that stage?
No, I think what we looked at was whether there was anything that we thought was, from an evidentiary perspective, material to say that, because clearly before, with other patrons have excluded, there is something that we have that we have seen through the cameras, or if anyone's made a complaint, there is something that we've substantiated an exclusion from. The significant rating was just that we need to pay particular attention to see whether these complaints are something that there's something behind that, or is it a patron because there was historical issues with patrons complaining about other patrons because there was a falling out of the two from a relationship perspective, a friendship, and so they were making complaints about someone engaging in illegal activity, then when that not necessarily wasn't the case. So before making a decision to exclude, we, with anyone, there's a level of due diligence that goes into it. But I appreciate significant rating, and I feel that we did pay particular attention to that patron.
So by due diligence, would that involve monitoring the patron when they came to the Pearl Room?
Yes, that's utilising, because this was before facial recognition. In this patron's case, they were obviously Pearl Room, so they had a membership card, so we would know when they go into the room. We've got a system on iTrack called Patron Watch, and that is what we can put alerting systems on for the surveillance team. So when a patron swipes, surveillance will get an alert. It gives them some direction to monitor. Usually it's to monitor the person's behaviour and any associates, and then if there's anything that comes from that, then that'll be passed to the investigations team in security to deal with.
And an iTrack notification would also be made by the surveillance operative who had observed the behaviour.
They would make a note if there was something observable of any note. If they were observing, especially let's say for instance this patron being in the room, and there was nothing of concern, they went to the cage, they exchanged for chips, they played, they left, and there was nothing else, then that wouldn't necessarily be noted.
Well, just taking 2015 as an example, and these are taken from that same document ID CRW 700.085.3902. So on the 11th, I don't want to think, on the 11th of January 2015, there is a notification which is quite detailed, and then the executive brief summary says, and I quote, monitored person of interest whilst in the Pearl Room, significant amounts of money, cash and chips changed hands. And then on the 17th of February 2015, there's also another detailed summary of what was observed, and it says, executive brief, possible loan sharking behaviour in Pearl Room. 17th of April 2015. The summary is executive brief, person of interest monitored live in the Pearl Room, money changed hands. And then the 8th of May 2015, executive brief, person of interest monitored, money changed hands. And then on the 10th of June 2015, executive brief, persons of interest monitored in the Pearl Room, money changed hands. Can you explain why this person was still allowed to come to Crown Perth at the end of 2015?
Well, at the time when they're reporting about the exchanging of, or the money, which is something that wasn't just constrained to this patron. That was what we could observe is not loan sharking, although there's one view from whoever made a note that it could possibly be. But all we observe in those occasions would have been lending, which was, until recent, was something that was permissible. The issue was if there was evidence to suggest that there was a percentage increase on top of that, or taking the possession of someone's property until they repay the loan. But that couldn't be observed with that person. There was others, as we saw, that was the lending, but then there was also something in return, or we saw notepads with notification that you owe us 10% week on week. Those people were excluded.
So in your mind, there's a difference between lending and loan sharking?
Yes.
And the difference is what?
Well, lending is if I look at loan sharking, I'm getting a percentage increase on top. So it's not in the space of good faith where I'm going to lend you, let's say, for instance, $100, knowing that you're going to give that money back to me at $100. Not that you're going to charge me $110 and $120 because I failed to pay, or you're going to take an item of mine and will not return that. So there's a difference in those types of behaviours.
But that's not the type of behaviour that you would necessarily observe from the monitor in the Pearl Room, is it? You'd see the initial exchange of cash or chips. You wouldn't necessarily see when the other patron was paying the first patron back.
I have seen not the paying back, but I have seen, I didn't see it, it was reported to me, and I saw the notes where someone had a notebook and was recording in their dialect that there was a percentage increase on top of that. Or I've seen someone else with that lent money, and they had on their phone what would appear to be diamonds or otherwise, which we could seriously believe that was loan sharking in response to that. So it can happen as overtly as that.
In any event, patron S on Crown Perth's own system has notifications through to March 2019. Would that be right?
If that's what it's saying there, yes, it's.
But it's your evidence that patron S was not banned until Nick Stokes made inquiries.
Coupled with the police information, or because through the years in the engagement I had with state and federal law enforcement, that name had never been raised as being involved in any criminal activity that they were aware of, or we were discussing the behaviour on site. But as soon as the conversation I had with police with respect to an investigation into what could be laundering, then that was enough, along with things, to exclude patroness.
Just one last question about generally the operations at Crown Perth during COVID times. Was the Pearl Room open at any time during any of the Perth lockdowns in the past 2 years, to your knowledge?
No.
It wasn't
not
open?
contrary to any government directions.
Are you aware of any government direction that allowed the Pearl Room to open during the lockdown periods?
I believe the most recent lockdown period, there was a restriction of 150 people at a venue. And so we clarified, I clarified with law enforcement because I speak to one of the police inspectors at Operation Tide, who is the industry liaison, because I initially received a call from him with respect to 150, believing that was the entire property. We had clarification that it wasn't. It was any venue could open with 150 except obviously the main casino. So I believe that along with bars and restaurants, the Pearl Room, based on the 150 capacity, could open.
So that was a lockdown in June, July of this year? The 29th
Yeah,
of June?
I believe that was the
3rd of
last lockdown we had.
Yep.
Yes.
So the previous 3 lockdowns, the Pearl Room was not open to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge. And if it was, it wouldn't have been in contrary to the directions.
Thank you. Nothing further, Commissioner.
Thank you, Ms Nelson. Do other council have questions for the witness?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Mr Damananda?
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr Lee, taking up the point that you just gave evidence on with respect to the opening of the Pearl Room, could I ask, operator, please, for you to bring up CRW.701.005.8255. This is an email that you forward on to Mr Murray and Mr Bossy with respect to the restrictions in July of this year.
That's correct.
And that then sees a communication raised by Mr Murray. If I can ask you please, operator, to go to CRW.701.005.8276. And you see you're copied into that email, and that records the 150 maximum occupancy that you mentioned.
That's correct, yes.
And it's on the basis of that particular steps were taken by Crown concerning the Pearl Room, isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I could then ask you, please, operator, to go to CRW.706.006.0004. You're aware that there was then a communication to the chairperson of the GWC with respect to the opening of the Pearl Room.
I'm aware that a formal notification was sent, yes.
And other than that instance involving communications with both the regulator as well as the police, are you aware of any other occasion where during lockdown the Pearl Room was open?
No.
Thank you. You were asked questions this morning about your role as the General Manager of both security and surveillance.
Yes.
Do you recall that?
I do.
Are you aware that the GWC has given approval to the amalgamation of those two roles?
I am, through Mr Joshua Preston historically, that any position or the change in position was there was formal recommendation or formal notification to the government asking for.
I ask you, please, operator, to go to CRW.708.004.1886. CRW.708.004.1886.
Doesn't appear to be in the corporate council.
The request was made. That is a letter written Can we try, please, CRW.708.004.17774? So this is a letter written to Mr. Connolly as the Chief Casino Officer in May of 2013 that deals with the proposed restructure of Crown Perth Surveillance and Security Departments. Have you seen this letter before, Mr. Lee?
I haven't seen it before.
If you scroll through it, the reasons for the restructure are explained together with the new role as well as the capacity to maintain operational integrity. Do the reasons set forward accord with your understanding as to why Crown proposed the restructure?
Yes, they do.
Good. Operator, can we try, please, GWC.002.0016.0087? So this is the agenda of a meeting of the Gaming and Wagering Commission. Operator, if you go to item 5.5 on that agenda, if you go to 0006, please, operator. Do you see there at item 5.5, there's a resolution of the GWC to note the approval of a restructure of the Security and Surveillance Department of Crown Perth provided on 29 July 2013 by the Chairman under delegation. Do you see that?
I see that.
Does that accord with your understanding from Mr. Preston as to how Crown was proceeding to have a amalgamation between the Security and Surveillance Department?
Yes, it does.
With respect to the monitoring room, are there, in relation to surveillance, are there restrictions on entry?
Yes, there is.
Are there restrictions on the ability of those who carry out surveillance to work elsewhere?
Yes, there is.
Is there a policy to that effect?
Yes, there is.
Can we see, operator, whether you can put on screen CRW.700.025.0063? Is this the policy that restricts members of the surveillance department from working elsewhere?
Yes, that is.
Does the surveillance team carry out audits on the security team?
Yes, they do.
Lee, you were asked certain questions about UARs and their distribution. Is there a policy with respect to UARs?
There's a company policy in respect to how
We can draw up, please, CRW.700.025.2423. I think it commences at 2421. So this is the standard operating procedure with respect to UARs. If I could ask your operator to go to page 2423, top of the page. You see there, Mr. Lee, it records that completed UAR forms and any additional relevant documentation will be sent to the AML team. Do you see that?
I do.
Does that refresh your memory as to whom relevant UARs are sent?
Yes.
Thank you. You were asked certain questions about Austrac making inquiries of Crown in December of 2020. Do you recall that?
I recall the question. Yes.
Yes. Can I ask, please, operator, for CRW.512.025.0955 on private screens only, please. This is a letter written by Mr. Stokes, the Group General Manager of AML, to a manager of Austrac. I'll ask you please to familiarise yourself with the contents of that letter. Operator, would you please scroll to enable Mr. Lee to read the letter?
Sorry, can you please scroll down? Yes. Yes, thanks. If you could scroll down. Yeah, I've read that.
Were you aware, Mr. Lee, from your work at Crown Perth, that a decline in visitation due to COVID restrictions and a improvement in the process with respect to the investigation of UARs was the reason for the decline that Crown gave to Austrac with respect to the inquiry raised by Austrac?
In relation to, I could appreciate that because of COVID and travel restrictions, a decrease in visitation, that would be commensurate with that. With respect to the Austrac reporting, in seeing referring to the bottom of page 1, there was comments made with respect to Austrac and Crown's reporting to Austrac. I do recall I think it was an informal conversation with Mr. Josh Preston a number of years ago that he had met with Austrac, and Austrac had made comment about the amount of reporting, and that there was just a lot of information going forward to them from Crown perspective, and it was about, as best as possible, tidying that up so that the reports that do go to Austrac are, in some respect, easier for them to identify what are the matters that should be reported and investigated from their perspective. So I could appreciate there would be a reduction based on that activity from a Crown perspective.
Thank you. Operator, would you go please to CRW.001.001.3150. You recall that you were asked, just on council screens please, operator. You recall that you were asked certain questions about this document by council assisting.
I do.
If I could direct your attention to line 6. which is an entry for 10 January 2020. If you work through that entry, Mr. Lee, you'll observe that this is really nothing to do with AML or suspicious activity. Does that cause you to reflect on whether this document is actually maintained by the legal department in respect of various queries, including persons of interest as well as AML and suspicious activity?
Yeah, looking at that entry, that it seems to be a more broader reporting spreadsheet with respect to any RFI, not necessarily those that have come from law enforcement.
Thank you. No more questions, Commissioner.
Thank you. Other questions? Mr Evans.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Lee, my name's Evans. I appear for the Gaming and Wagering Commission. Perhaps we could just have that document back up again, if we could, just on room screens only. I want to clarify with you, Mr. Lee, some aspects of your evidence, really only in relation to three concepts. One is the person of interest. The second of that is intelligence sharing. And the third is what I call informational, formal information sharing, and how those three fit together.
Okay.
So can I deal with persons of interest first? Am I right in thinking that a POI, as the term is used within Crown Perth, is any person that comes to the attention of any regulatory or compliance function within the organisation for consideration?
No, not in a general sense, because there may be a person of interest. There could be a person of interest that we see that is non-gaming related. So it's a drug matter. It has nothing to do over the top of a table, a machine, or on the casino footprint. It could be restricted to the hotels. It could be restricted to a car park on our property. So that POI, we will engage with law enforcement with respect to that.
Well, I'll talk to you about engagement after. I really just want to understand the concept of a POI as you use it in your documentation. So that in that instance, that is a person of interest because they have come to your attention for some kind of response. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. It's because a person of interest it can be used quite broadly. A person of interest could be that we've observed some behaviour on a table, or it's been brought to our attention, or the dealer can press a duress facility that it's in the directions referring to suspect legal activity, because they might feel that the patron's play is something of concern and they want surveillance to pay particular attention to that.
So that's POI specifically
that
in relation to gaming activity?
Yes. Yeah. So there's a broad sense of gaming activity in specific, and then criminal in specific, drugs or other types of crimes. As I say, it's quite a broad sense of the term. How we report that to the regulators depends on where that sits.
It depends very much upon the nature of the interest, effectively, which evokes the status of a POI. And in relation to criminality, you have had a long-standing arrangement for collaboration with WA Police, I think you referred to.
Yes.
I don't think you were taken to the actual memorandum of understanding, you referred to it.
I wasn't taken to it, but it was...
But there is a memorandum of understanding. Perhaps, first, Operator, I'll actually park that document. Perhaps you could bring up CRW 709 149 5257, room screens only. Are you familiar with this document?
I am.
Now, I understand this is an MOU with WA Police which was entered into about October, November 2014.
That's correct.
You were also referred to your policy on liaison,
Yes.
which you noted you had recently approved the current version of. My reading of that document is there's been a similar policy in place since about 2013 in various iterations. You're familiar with that?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And this MOU in part reflects that policy, does it not?
It does.
Yes. This MOU provides a framework for what I call intelligence sharing. Is that correct? In the broader sense.
Agreed, yes.
And in its terms, it provides for a cooperation between WA Police and the casino for what I call each-way communications in relation to matters of interest to both or either agency.
Agreed, yes.
That is, you have a a liaison constituted by this where you can interrogate WA Police to the extent they're prepared to share information,
Yes, that's correct.
and they can interrogate you to the extent that you're prepared to share information.
Yes, that's correct.
And that can be done quite informally.
Yes.
It's subject to respecting any statutory prohibitions that may be in place under the Gaming and Wagering Commission Act, the Casino Control Act or the Privacy Act and so on, but it provides for informal level of communication about general intelligence.
Yes, it does.
And that informs some of your activities that you've referred to, I think about paragraph 216 and on of your statement, about such things as not taking action against a patron immediately who might be a POI in order to facilitate the conduct of an investigation.
Yes, that's correct.
Now that's what I call part of general intelligence sharing, and that reflects what is referred to at 2 on 6 and onwards, although in my copy much of that is blanked out, so I can't actually read it. And then we have the document which Mr. Darmananda took you through to a moment ago, which is CRW 001-0013150. That's the almost unreadable spreadsheet.
Yes.
Now, my reading of this is that this is what I might call formal requests for, or record of formal requests for information.
That's correct, yeah.
Insofar as concerns law enforcement agencies, there are a number of formal powers which can be invoked to seek information from the casino.
Yes.
And so far as WA Police is concerned, the formal power which the casino actually requires to be invoked and WA Police normally use is the power of Part 6 of the Criminal Investigation Act. Is that correct? What's called an OTP or
Yes, that's
order to
correct.
produce.
Order to produce, yes.
And that's effectively a summons to produce business records.
Yes, it is.
And is my understanding correct that both to ensure compliance with legislation, essentially to ensure compliance with legislation generally, the OTP is the vehicle by which surveillance footage is actually handed over to WA Police as a business record?
Yes, that's correct.
I see also in this, if I'm reading it correctly, that there are instances when, for example, you respond to a subpoena from a legal practice in relation to, for example, a family law matter, which is also a compulsive process.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the provision of footage to those matters. Usually the externals, we engage our internal legal team to
deal with that, and that's why this is a legal team document, in fact.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. No further questions, Commissioner.
Mr Evans, no other counsel? I don't have any questions for Mr Lee, so is there any follow-up?
No, thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks very much. Mr Gandy?
Commissioner, I have no further question.
Thank you. Mr Lee, that concludes the hearing your evidence for today. The summons will remain in place in case other commissioners have other questions for you, but we're certainly finished with the hearing for today. So thank you very much for attending and giving your evidence. So we will now adjourn until 2 p.m.
All rise.